Hi, I'm Dr. Emil Liu. I'm a physician scientist and medical oncologist at the Masonic Cancer Center at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. In college, my major was biochemistry. So I studied the biologic sciences, and as I went through college, I really decided that I wanted to understand more about the physiology as it pertained to human disease. And that's what led me to want to study cancer biology and ultimately become both a physician and a scientist to study this to help patients. While I was in college as a biochemistry major, I became very fascinated by cancer biology and why cancer cells at the molecular and cellular level did what they did. But at the human level, I was also very affected by people I knew who got diagnosed with cancer. My best friend's mom was diagnosed with pancreas cancer during our first year of college, and she died right at the end of our first year. That affected me a lot, and then over the years, I met other people who were diagnosed with pancreas cancer, some of whom were close to me, family, friends, or neighbors, and that really set me on a path where I really wanted to be involved in the outcome. And so as a physician who eventually underwent training in oncology, and now as an actual oncologist, what really drives me is to help patients like that, to be able to diagnose cancers like this earlier and to be able to find and discover cures. So my research team and I were very grateful for funding from the National Pancreas Foundation to carry out our research work. My lab looks at underlying cellular and molecular mechanisms that drive the most invasive of invasive cancers, and pancreas cancer is one of the most principally aggressive type of cancers known to man. So one of the things that we look at is how cells communicate with each other in the tumor microenvironment and how this is critical to tumors becoming more invasive and especially resistant to the drugs that we give in the clinic. We look at a very specific form of cell communication called tunneling nanotubes. Tunneling nanotubes are relatively newly discovered in the last decade and a half, and they're long, naturally occurring cell extensions that I kind of call like skyways, like we see here in Minneapolis and Minnesota in general, that connect buildings. At the cellular level, cancer cells will create them. We discovered, incidentally, that pancreas cancer cells were doing this a lot, especially if they were a more aggressive phenotype, or especially if they were drug resistant. So the National Pancreas Foundation grant was instrumental in us carrying out a study that we published in the journal Scientific Reports of 2018. The principal findings of this study were that the chemotherapeutic drugs that are given in the clinic, we applied to cancer cells and actually induced cells to become more aggressive by forming more communication networks. By doing this, they also were able to transmit drug from cell to cell, and in this way, we believe this is a novel form of how drug cells become resistant to chemotherapy. We were also able to do very high-resolution imaging of tumors from human patients and find that these communication networks were actually present in those tumors as well. So we discovered this discovery, we think, is just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, in understanding how intercellular communication is critical to pancreas cancer, not just in a dish, but also in actual tumors and how this is behaving in human patients. And our ideal scenario would be to understand how this function works and how to undercut this communication from ever occurring. We believe that's a novel therapeutic strategy that could be integrated into clinical trial design. The National Pancreas Foundation grant was instrumental, especially in my early career. I've been at the University of Minnesota for almost a decade, and I was fortunate enough to receive the National Pancreas Foundation within my first few years of starting my lab, also undertaking what might be considered a very high-risk endeavor in terms of a research project. It's difficult to secure research funding in general then and still now. So the faith invested by the National Pancreas Foundation in our team and me as an individual was really crucial in able to carry out a study that I see as being high risk, but also potential high reward. So some of the payoff is this first publication that we did in 2018. I think it's just the beginning of further studies in looking at how chemotherapy and other drugs can actually induce a higher level of communications via the communication cell network called tunneling nanotubes, and how this might be responsible, at least in part, for how pancreatic cancers become drug resistant. My career in research in general in oncology and in cancer is extremely rewarding. I think my training as a physician scientist took a really long time and many years building up to the point where I could practice in the clinic and in the hospital and be able to treat patients, whether they have a new diagnosis of pancreas cancer or have a long-time diagnosis but need treatment despite drugs not working. And at this point, while there have been a lot of developments and advances in the last decade, in the last few decades, the relatively low survival rate of pancreas cancer is still very unacceptable. It's one of the most aggressive cancers that we know of, and its ability to overcome the treatments that we currently have available is really unacceptable. So being able to go back to the lab and do translational and basic science studies with my lab and translational research teams is extremely rewarding. Being able to try and understand what the problem is in the clinic and go back and try and decipher and solve those problems in the lab and go back and forth is really the ideal. And so whether it be day-to-day, month-to-month, and with support from the National Pancreas Foundation and others that are really crucial to carrying out this research, my hope is that in the years and decades to come, our team can make a contribution towards a cure for pancreatic cancer. In sum, I just want to thank, on behalf of my entire research team, the National Pancreas Foundation for the generous grant. It really was able to allow us to launch an entire research program on pancreas cancer specific and make new discoveries of how pancreatic cancer becomes resistant to chemotherapeutic drugs. In the future, and the ongoing studies that we have going on pancreatic cancer in the months and years to come, we hope to extend this finding to this and other cancers, but also to delve more deeply into understanding at the cellular and molecular levels how this comes about. So thank you again to everyone at the NPF, thank you to the donors and everyone at the foundation for your generous support.